Saudi Arabia's justice system, human rights, any of our business? We're asking because the Labour Party has joined the Foreign Office for calling for Saudi Arabia not to go ahead with the forced paralysis of a man as punishment for stabbing his friend 10 years ago. All sorts of other issues are coming up. Let's speak to John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator for The Independent on Sunday. Hello, John.
Hello there. Good morning, Nicky.
And George Galloway, MP. George Galloway, good morning to you.
Good morning.
John Rentoul, in what ways should we put pressure on the Saudi regime on its human rights on this particular egregious example?
Well, I think we should condemn it much more forcefully than we have. I think the Foreign Office statement yesterday expressing concern was pathetic. But there are limits to what we can actually achieve against a government as rich and self-confident as the Saudi one.
And what do you think about their human rights in terms of women's rights and gay rights and their judicial system?
Well, I think it's terrible, and I think if we could get them to sign up to something like the European Convention on Human Rights, I don't know what the Saudi government attitude on that is, but I mean, if we could spread the idea of universal human rights, I'm sure they're signed up to some kind of UN charter. We could try to embarrass them, but I mean, the only way you've got to choose whether to try and engage them or to isolate them, and on balance, I think engagement is probably more likely to be effective.
George Galloway, any of our business?
Well, they're entitled to have the justice system that they want, and we're entitled to have a view about it. And the view we ought to have about it is that this is medieval barbarism, and we want nothing to do with it or them. Instead, we do the opposite. We sell them a mountain of weapons every year. We send Prince Charles there to kiss and rub noses with them. We invite them in open carriages up the Mall. They're our best friends, as David Cameron very recently opined whilst there. And it's not that David Cameron didn't know that they would want to paralyze people medically, because they have done that many times already. They chop people's heads off in public every Friday afternoon. They chop their hands off. This is a gang of 25,000 people called Al Saud who loot their country, who torture their people in dungeons, and we train them. We have a military mission in their country, training their armed forces, who then went and invaded their neighbour, Bahrain, and are meting out barbarism there also.
Mm-hmm. John Rentoul, do you find yourself in agreement with George Galloway?
Not usually, no.
do you on this occasion? What has George Galloway actually said that is not true?
Well, I think all of that is true. The question is, what do we do about it, and whether we should cease to sell arms to the Saudi regime. And I think that's a very difficult question, and rather, I mean, it's more finely balanced than I think George allows, because you could take the purist, neutralist view of the world that Britain shouldn't really be involved in the arms trade at all. But if we are going to make and sell arms, then you have to judge each case on its merits. And I think it's very.
What are the merits, John? What are the merits of selling weapons to a barbaric medieval autocracy like that? What are the merits of training their soldiers? What are the merits of Prince Charles rubbing noses with them?
Well, because they are an important ally, and the question is, what would the alternative be? I mean, at least they are a force for stability in the region. I mean, it may be a pretty unpleasant force for stability.
And this is the voice of liberalism, Nicky. This is the voice of liberalism.
Yeah, but at least
they are an important ally. We have an important ally that is about to paralyze a man of 24 for a crime he committed when he was 14, having kept him in a dungeon for the last decade. We are important friends and allies of a country that invades its neighbours and subjects them to
George.
medieval barbarism.
Wait a minute.
This is the voice of the pro-war John Rentoul, the voice of liberalism. And I think everybody listening to it can hear just how pitiful it sounds, not least from the timbre of his voice. because he hates having to say these things, even though they are the remorseless logic of every position that he holds.
I just don't know what you're talking about, George. I mean, you are the person who wanted us to be allied with Saddam Hussein, who was a far worse.
No, that's just not true. I've never asked us to be an ally of Saddam Hussein.
No, so you didn't praise him.
You asked us to invade.
You didn't salute his indefatigability.
John, you asked us to invade Iraq.
What about Assad?
You asked us to invade Iraq, and 1 million people
died.
And you're asking us to invade Syria. And here's a point that I haven't made yet, Nicky.
Let me allow you to make it in a minute. I'll allow you to make it in a minute. I just want to, John Rentoul, I want to bring in a couple of callers, if I may. It's delightful to have both of you gentlemen on the programme. David in Southend. Hello, David, and Ali in Wembley. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
You heard Mr. Galloway describe this country as practising medieval barbarism. Is George Galloway right?
I want to know, really, if they're barbaric, then who's barbaric that goes to war on a lie, pepper bomb city, kills innocent children, pulls our soldiers into a war that we've got no right to be there? I want to know who are the barbaric people. I think the West are, aren't we?
No, I don't agree with that.
Where are the human rights for the Iraqi children, the Libyan children, the Syrian children? Yeah?
Okay, John Rentoul, respond to that.
Well, I think if you're talking about human rights in Libya, for example, then I think the Libyans have asserted those with our assistance quite successfully. I mean, I think it's been very difficult since, and that's what we were trying to do in Iraq, and the fact that it hasn't worked very well doesn't mean that it wasn't worth trying.
Well. Not work very well. There's kids dying out there that are getting shot in the head. I watch other outlets on the internet.
What do you think about this? Just on this issue, though. Yes, there are many wrongs in the world. If you look at it, it's an appalling world. But on this issue of a man being surgically paralysed as punishment, just narrow it down for a second. What do you think of that?
Let's look at the big picture. We're narrowing it down to that. That's their business at the end of the day.
Right, it's their business at the end of the day. Okay, Ali in Wembley. Is it their business at the end of the day?
Morning, Nicky. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, it's as much our business because cast your eye back, and you've had a pretty good education, like many of us, Nicky. Sykes-Picot, we set up this ghastly regime amongst many ghastly regimes in the Middle East. Successive British governments have propped them up. When, for example, Al-Yamama arms deal, Tony Blair pulled a corruption inquiry, we suck up to the Saudi crown, as we sucked up to Bashar al-Assad when he was sitting next to the Prime Minister, as Tony Blair was in Libya. So the reality is that successive British regimes share in the responsibility of what's going to happen to this young boy or young man who's going to be surgically paralysed.
What do you think about that? Just can I narrow it down with you, Ali? What do you think about the justice meted out in Saudi Arabia and then this particular example of it?
I'll ask you a direct question. What's happening to this poor guy? It's obvious. He's a poor man who's going to be punished when the rich Saudi princes that get outriders blocking off Marble Arch and Park Lane going for the mall get away with blue murder literally. But we suck up to the Americans who execute people. I don't see our government lining up and saying, "Oh, stand clear, mate." We extradited people to America, however ghastly they might be. And I commented on that program when you ran it a few months ago. When we send people to supermax prisons, they surgically execute people in America. I'll tell you what, it's a Judeo-Christian hypocrisy and a Europhile view of the world. I don't defend the Saudi regime. I think it's a ghastly regime that is got no legitimacy for its people. But let's not stand here holier than thou. We are in a glass house and we're throwing stones.
Okay, George Galloway, you wanted to make another point. What was it?
Well, it was that we are a part of a coalition involving them to introduce these very same systems into Syria, and John Rentoul supports it. Indeed, calls for it to be.
Can I come back in on that, please, Nicky, as well?
No, John Rentoul will respond to it.
The Al Qaeda elements, which the US said more than a year ago were a flicker and are now aflame in Syria, are practicing these very things in the parts of Syria which they now control, assisted by us. So your question, is it our business? It's already our business. And we are, as John Rentoul put it, a key ally of these people. Saudi Arabia is paying for the
John Rentoul.
If we have an opportunity, John Rentoul.
I've just lost track of what I'm supposed to be supporting here. I'm very clear who I don't support.
They're strategic ally. They're a strategic ally, and they bring stability to the region.
The Saudis are.
Yeah, you said that earlier on.
Well, I think they are, and I think that is difficult. But I think the alternatives might be worse. But I think I'll tell you who I don't support in Syria, and that's Bashar Assad, and George Galloway does support him, and that's something he's got to account for.
What do you mean George Galloway supports him?
He supports the dictator in Syria, and he thinks that because I'm worried about that and think that it would be better if Assad were taken out of the picture. Therefore, I'm supporting Al Qaeda in Syria, which is a bizarre and typically Gallowayan argument, I would have thought.
Doing the fighting.
Do you want to respond after that?
Half a brain cell knows, and being paid for by Saudi Arabia. I think listeners will already discern a pattern that this kind of system that the Saudis stand for, they are seeking to spread in Syria, and are their key allies in John Rentoul's words. Now, he calls that a recipe for stability. The word he was searching for was moderation, but I know that he pulled back from it, because moderation is hardly a description.
Are you a supporter of Assad? That was the accusation.
No, I'm not, but that's not what we're discussing here. I'm an opponent of us sending military material and money into a civil war in Syria. And I think that I will be proved right by events. After all, I was in Afghanistan when I was the last man standing opposing Mrs. Thatcher's support for what became Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, because I don't believe that you should create monsters in the Frankenstein model without reading the novel to the end, knowing that the monster breaks free of your control and you no longer have any influence over what it does.
OK, we must take the travel news at 9:52. Here it is.
We'll start in Cumbria with the M6.
We're joined by George Galloway, Respect MP for Bradford West, who backs the union, and John Rentoul, chief political commentator for The Independent on Sunday, who thinks Unite have got it wrong. George Galloway, first of all, you think basically the union is doing what unions do, is that right?
Well, this is like something from Downton Abbey. A billionaire boss sitting on the deck of his £130 million yacht in the Côte d'Azur, drawing up plans to dump 1,400 Scottish hard-working, honest men and women on the dole. It's unbelievable.
Because they're losing money.
Well, it's a strategic asset to us. This used to be owned by BP, which that well-known socialist Winston Churchill took into public ownership nearly 100 years ago, precisely because these things are too important to be left to vulture capitalists on their 250-foot yacht.
Okay, well,
this is crucial to the
that.
Industrial infrastructure of Scotland and of the UK.
We'll come to that, because that's the very interesting argument. But John Rentoul, just on the fact that it's private, the fact that it will close without union agreement, and the fact that that agreement has not been forthcoming, what do you make of that?
Well, I think the trade union has clearly played it extremely badly. This looks like the confrontational politics of the 1970s, where the union adopts an extremely intransigent position right up until the 11th hour, when the owners threaten to close it, and then suddenly the union turns turtle and decides to start to negotiate.
Because you think they've got no leverage at all, really? Is that right?
Well, they plainly haven't now. I mean, if they'd engaged in a constructive attitude, talking about how the costs might be reduced earlier on, they might have some leverage, but they really haven't now.
It's quite a big thing, John, for the employers to say we're going to close your final salary pensions, and you wouldn't have thought that would go that far in stopping them losing £10 million a month. So it's probably worth fighting for them, isn't it?
Well, how do you mean? I mean, if it's losing money, it's losing money. I mean, I think
you just cut everywhere.
You have to. Lots of people have had to accept the end of final salary pension schemes. I mean, those things have gone out. Those are a luxury in large parts of British industry today, and it's far more important to preserve jobs than to save luxuries
George?
like pension schemes.
Well, how
like
not surprising that Tony Blair's favourite lickspittle, John Rentoul, is out batting for the billionaire sitting on his yacht. It's not just about the final salary pension. It's a savage reduction of £10,000 a year in the workers' wages, the freezing of their pay for 3 years, and a drastic reduction in their shift payment. People working 3 shifts, which John Rentoul couldn't even dream of doing. He's about to have, like all journalists, probably a long wine-filled lunch. That's what he calls work. The workers in Grangemouth, with their hands and their faces dirty with oil and petrol, are being robbed of £10,000 a year in wages,
George, I still don't understand.
A private employer. And how the chief correspondent of The Independent on Sunday can justify sitting in a studio slavering over a billionaire yacht owner, it makes me feel sick to the pit of my stomach.
I was going to ask you, George, how you deal with the £10 million a week, a month that it's losing.
Jeremy, if he can't afford, and he seems to be doing rather well, if he can't afford to keep the plant open, then as Winston Churchill did, we must take it into public ownership.
Well, come back on that point now.
Well, that solves the problem of where the money is going to come from. It's going to come from the state.
Yes,
George Galloway.
Why not?
Yeah,
why not?
The magic money tree,
why
George.
Not?
Yes, good.
Why not?
Well,
it's a crucial asset.
I don't know,
it's
George.
1,400 men's jobs in an industrial desert.
I know it is, absolutely, and I shall try not to be as personal to you as you were to me, but where are you going to get the money from?
Well, look, the state needs an oil and energy infrastructure. That's why the energy firms are in such bad odour in the country, because they're too important to be left to vulture capitalists. They're a vital national asset and interest, and that's too important to be left to a man on a yacht.
But if we're refining oil, George, can't we just pay somebody else to refine it more cheaply?
And what happens when strategically we need to be in control of the refining of our own oil? That's why Mr. Churchill took it into public ownership, because we can't allow other countries, Russia with gas, the Saudi potentates,
I think, is the
Saudi potentates that Rentoul was last on the BBC with me defending, controlling our oil reserves. We need national control over vital national assets.
All right, John
Any
Rentoul?
patriotic person understands that.
I bet lots of people ring and agree with George Galloway here, John Rentoul.
Well, I'm sure they do, but I mean, they can't. You can't just wish market forces away. If it is losing £10 million a month, which it may not be. Some people are sceptical about the company's figures, and it wouldn't be the first time that the company has exaggerated the scale of losses. But if it is losing £10 million a month, then costs have to be cut, and there's just no way around that. And George Galloway can rant and rave as much as he likes, but he can't magic £10 million a month out of thin air.
Thank you very much, John Rentoul of The Independent on Sunday, and George Galloway, Respect MP for Bradford West.
On the 7th of November.